Hi, my name is Destiny Garcia, and in the next 10 minutes in this video, I'm going to go through the grant writing cycle with you. So at its most basic parts, the grant writing cycle can be broken down three ways. You have your pre-grant phase, so that's where you would do things like build your project and research this grant. You have your grant writing phase, which is the meat of the work. That's where you're going to put together your cover letter and your budget and edit and all of those big hairy components of a grant. And at the very end, you have the post-grant cycle, which would be things like, what do you do when you have a check in the bank? Because there are some finer details in reporting after you've successfully gained a grant, or dealing with rejection. How do you pick up your bootstraps and march forward when you get that first rejection letter on a grant? So we're going to take it one step at a time. And the very first step in the grant writing process, if you've been listening, you'd probably be inclined to say it's the pre-grant process. It's not. So the very first part of your grant is always going to be the project. Your project needs to be at the heart of everything you do. So having a need, having a plan, and having something that you want to accomplish is central. Why else are you writing a grant? Some people are tempted to look at grants, kind of pick one that looks lucrative, and design a project to fit that grant, but that's insincere, and that reads pretty clearly in a grant. Your project has to be based on a need in your students and your community. So if you try to retrofit the project to the grant, you're going to be a little less successful, as when you really have identified a need, have a strong plan to fix that need, and are going to find the best grant for that plan, as opposed to vice versa. So the start of your grant process is always really inspecting your community and deciding what you want to accomplish. So that project, having a real need-driven project, is part of building your story. And your story is an incredibly important component of your grant. It's never going to be listed on a grant as your requirements. You're not going to see needs, qualifications, budget, story. That's not on the list, but it is one of the common factors to really successful grants. If you can tell a compelling emotional story about why your community or students need this project, and how you are going to fix it. So having that project at the heart of your grant writing process and having the story that drives that project is going to go a long way towards ensuring your success. So once we have a project in mind, then we can move on over to the pre-grant phase. So the pre-grant phase can't be taken lightly. So the pre-grant phase is not only designing your project, but sourcing your grant, which is a place where many people in the race to getting a grant will drop out because it is overwhelming if you don't do it smart, in a smart way. So one phenomenal resource for grants is grants.gov, which is where all of the federally funded grants are located and centered and able to be applied for. So grants.gov actually has a very elegant system of filters. So, for example, I'm with a for-profit business, so I'm very limited in the grants that I can apply for. But they have a filter system where I can check, I want a for-profit eligible grant, I want it to be in environmental science, and I want it to be based around public outreach. So I can narrow these things down and find grants that suit my project. So you can do weather-based grants or ocean-based grants or engineering-based grants or specifically engineering for females-based grants. So if you get, if you finesse those filters, you can quickly navigate your way to a grant that works for your project. Part of that pre-grant process is really thinking about what your project intends to do. So one of the big ways would be budget. Make sure your grant fits the project. So if you are looking to open a community garden. You don't need a $200,000 grant. So make sure you're finding a grant that works for you as far as budget goes, as far as timeline goes. Don't think you're going to be able to pump out a grant in a week. So if the deadline's next Tuesday, that's probably not your grant. So make sure the budget's appropriate, that the timeline is appropriate, and that they want to solve the same problem that you want to solve. So make sure that their grant, or your grant, fits your budget and your story and your project. Whoop! There goes the project. And here's the big key. Once you have found the grant, read everything. Every speck of information about this grant is going to help you become successful. So that is limited, not just limited to the qualifications for the grant itself. That means really dig in and do your research. That means go look at last year's winners. It means look at the winners before that. It means look at the company who is sponsoring that grant. What is valuable to them? Because there are so many parts of grants that are kind of hidden in those fine details. You might find things like you're only eligible for this grant if your logo includes the color purple. Maybe not quite that severe, but those things are tucked away in there. And there is nothing more disheartening than starting the grant writing process only as you're making your way down that list of qualifications to find out that you are excluded. So make sure you read everything and that your plan and your project fits everything. So if there's part of your project that you're like, that doesn't quite fit, fix it. It's your project and you have the capability to do that. Or find another grant. So either tailor your project to fit your grant or tailor the grant to fit your project. It has to be one of those two things. These things have to be very aligned because this is a very competitive process. So you want to make sure that your mission is aligned with the sponsoring company's mission and that your plan fits within the budget and the guidelines. So making sure that that all kind of works together into a cohesive plan. So once you have really selected your grant and it matches your timeline, that your story is solid, that budget is appropriate, you can move into grant writing. And that's kind of one of the big scary parts. And the grant writing process is not so different. You, again, want to read everything. We're going to be visiting that bullet a lot. Read everything. Read every speck of information in that grant. Every bit of information that they provide you is a key to building that successful portfolio. And there are tons of grants. Just make sure that you are eligible, that you have a manageable time frame, that it supports their mission, that is in your budget and in their budget. And then you can get into that grant writing. And grant writing, although it's overwhelming, it's also quite stepwise. So most grants are very specific in the things that they ask for. They ask for a cover letter, an executive summary, a need, a qualification, your budget, and they ask for these things in very specific ways. And if they're asking for them in specific ways, if in that literature they say that they want 250 words answering these 17 and a half questions, then by gosh, your answer better be 17 and a half points long and about 250 words. So those guidelines are there for reasons, and overshooting a word count might be looked at as carelessness, which is not a good thing for a grant, and that might be a reason that you get passed over. So making sure that you adhere to all of those fine guidelines is a fantastic way to ensure your success. And that goes for every one of those small categories. So sometimes it's hard to differentiate between a summary and a project plan, but they're almost always listed in parentheses behind the question. So it'll say plan, implementation strategy, partners included. So every single one of those things that they ask for, make sure you address in that part of the statement. And address it in the words that they use. Go all the way back to elementary school and make sure you restate the question. So if they ask for your classroom goals, use the term classroom goals. My classroom goals are. Don't try to sneak it in there like, I hope to achieve through this layered product. No, use the words that they ask for. Make it easy for them. Make it absolutely jump off that page that you are delivering exactly what they want, and that's exactly why they should fund this project. So reading everything, and making sure that you include answers to everything that they ask for. A lot of which is going to include very specific data. So data is a great place to start for a grant. If you only have an intuition or a feeling that this grant would work, that does not bode well for you. Even if what you're doing is innovative and pioneering and cutting edge, there has to be some kind of related data. So the more studies that you can include in your grant, the more concrete data, like pre-assessments in your own school, that you can include, that you have done some baseline research, and if not baseline data on your own students, then studies from others that are at least related. So having solid data is a fantastic way to make that grant writing process go smoothly, especially in the qualifications section or the need section. And you always want to be very specific when you're addressing any category, really. So instead of saying young students like bright colors, that's not very specific. So let's say students at Oak Park between the ages of 5 and 7 received improved scores when bright colors are utilized. So as specific as you can. Avoid those big generalizations like most, or Louisiana is the most XYZ state